This is my video on Marie Curie, my presentation. I'm Jason Loosle. This is for Physics 2210 at Dixie State University. And Marie Curie is definitely a scientist to be remembered. She had a lot of work in radioactivity. In the late 1800s and early 1900s is when she did most of her work. So let's begin. These are some of her accomplishments in her life. These are mostly her major accomplishments. She was actually the first woman ever to win a Nobel Prize. She won that in 1903 for her work in radioactivity and physics. She was the first person ever to win 2 Nobel Prizes, and she did that. Her second Nobel Prize was in 1911. She came from very, very humble beginnings. We'll talk about that in a minute. She coined the term radioactivity. She discovered 2 elements along with her husband and has another element named after her family because of their long-term contributions to the scientific community. And she's had multiple films and a play that have been written about her life and the improvements that she's done to the scientific community, all of her accomplishments. And actually one of them is scheduled to come out this year. So, her early upbringing. She was born in 1867 as the youngest of 5 children to 2 humble school teachers in Poland, which in 1867 that was under Russian control, which meant that at any given time a Russian soldier or a Russian police officer could come into your school, and if you were speaking Polish or if you were learning Polish, then they would arrest your entire class. So she was one of the most fluent in her class in Russian. Her name at birth was actually not Marie, it was Maria, and I'm not even going to try with that last name, but as you can see right there, that is her last name. Her mother died while she was young, and she became a governess to support herself because her father, being a poor school teacher, didn't have the funds or the means to support all of their children. And so she wanted to learn, but in Poland at that time there were very, very few opportunities, and it was actually illegal for women to go to college. So she, being the governess, saved up money to try and support her learning that she wanted to do. In 1891, her older sister, who lived in Paris, France, offered her a place to stay nearby that was nearby the University of Paris, also known as Sorbonne University. And after moving there, she began studying math and science. And in 1893, she met her future husband named Marie Curie, and he was a nearby scientist working in Paris, and around that time is when she actually changed her spelling of her name from Maria to Marie, which is the French spelling, and she got married, so changed her last name as well to Marie Curie. She's the first woman ever to graduate from Sorbonne University, or the University of Paris, with a degree in physics, and Marie and Pierre later went on to have 2 daughters, Irene in 1896, I believe, and Eve in 1901, or 1902, yes. And Irene actually went on to contribute greatly in the scientific community as well. So Marie and her husband, Pierre, lived in a time where there was very little known about radioactivity. There was one known radioactive element, which was uranium, but Marie and Pierre were convinced that there were many more radioactive elements waiting to be discovered. So their research included a compound that was called pitchblende, which is composed of uranium along with a lot of other elements. And what they did in their research was they boiled down the uranium with different acids, or boiled down the pitchblende to extract the uranium with the different acids, and they found that the resulting sludge, after boiling it down, was actually more radioactive after you took out the uranium. So that led them to conclude that what was left in the pitchblende was actually other elements that were even more radioactive than the uranium itself. So, after more years of study of this process, and after they were able to isolate an element, they finally discovered polonium, which is 330 times more radioactive than uranium. So they recognized this, and they got some recognition for that, but not a ton. But they also recognized that the remainder of what was left over after they pulled out the polonium was even more radioactive still. So at this point, they were kind of running low on funds, and this pitch blend, which was needed to boil down so they could extract not only the uranium but also the polonium to figure out what this last element in there was. They didn't have the funds to get that because it was extremely expensive, but there was an Australian company that did work on the pitch blend to process it and pull out the uranium, and they just had this sludge left over as waste. It was radioactive, and they didn't know what to do with it. So they contracted out this Australian company to give them that radioactive waste, and they were able to get loads of it for really cheap, where they continued their research and were able to prove they were able to provide evidence that the element radium did exist, and they brought that to the scientific community, but without having the actual element, they couldn't. There were a lot of people that didn't believe them yet. So after 4 more years of that, working with that, they were able to bring about a solid amount of radium that was isolated, so they could then take that to the scientific community and prove that element existed. So the next couple of slides I want to talk about the recognition and the tragedy that happens. So in this picture you can see it is actually the Nobel Prize that Marie Curie and Pierre received together as a husband and wife duo. So right over here on the right you can see that it was given to them in 1903, and you can see it was awarded to both Pierre and Marie, and I just really liked that. I mean, they still have the scanned copy of the Nobel Prize that they were awarded with. That's really cool in my book, at least. So in 1903, Marie and her husband, Pierre, received the Nobel Prize for physics in their work with radioactivity. So that same year, Marie also received her doctorate in physics at the University of Paris that she had been studying all this time. So just 3 years after receiving that recognition, while both of their children were under 10 years old, Irene was 8 and Eve was 2, Pierre was killed after being hit by a horse-drawn carriage. Marie, the newly widowed mother, was stricken with grief, but she knew that her husband would want her to continue on the work and bring forth that scientific knowledge that they were searching for. So she did continue that research, and what she had started, she continued it with even more vigor, and that led her to receive her second Nobel Prize in 1911 for chemistry and detecting radiation. So in her later working years, she actually started working with her daughter as her partner, and they brought about the first mobile X-ray machines that were used in World War I to help injured soldiers receive the care that they needed. They were able to extract bullet pieces and bullet fragments and reset bones with these mobile X-rays to save these soldiers' lives. So in her later years, she received many, many awards and was a well-acclaimed scientist, even in her day, and especially now after she's very well recognized. She passed away in 1934 due to all of the radiation. Now we recognize it's due to all of the radiation poisoning that she had received over prolonged years, and that weakened her immune system and brought upon her death. Her daughter actually passed away to the same fate many years later, 30 plus years later, because the radiation poisoning brought about leukemia. And so her work in her time was revolutionary, and it changed the way scientists worked and thought, and it just is amazing what the things that she was able to accomplish. So I wanted to look up a little bit more on her, so I pulled up a few quotes that were really famous from her, and these down here are those quotes. So she said, "Nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood." I like that because it shows that she recognized that once what people fear is the unknown, and if you just try and understand the unknown, it's no longer needed to be feared. The next ones were, "Have no fear of perfection, you'll never reach it, and be less curious about the people and more curious about ideas." I really think these quotes really show who she was as a person and help us to recognize the things that she really could accomplish, and she did accomplish. So these are my works cited. This is my references page. I've got all of these, and I would definitely encourage if you want to look more into it. There's a lot more on Marie Curie, and she did a whole lot of wonderful things. I would also encourage watching any of the documentaries that have been published about her, or the movie that's soon to come out. And that is my presentation. Thank you very much for watching.